Welcome back to another episode of Your Hope-Filled Perspective, where it's always our goal to restore hope, renew minds, and empower listeners to live in their God-given identity. I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Bengtson, and I'm delighted you're here to spend just a few minutes of your week with us. Today, we are going to be talking about learning to thrive, not just survive when life falls apart. My guest today, Niki Hardy, is a dear friend, and her life has fallen apart on a few occasions. So today, she's going to share what God taught her through it. But to start off this episode, I want to remind us of John 10:10 that says, "The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. But I have come that they might have life and have it to the full." And the other verse that I want to refer to is Philippians 4, verses 4-7, that says, "Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all, for the Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your request to God. And then the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus." Today's guest is Niki Hardy, who's an author, a speaker, a podcast host, and a lover of hot buttered toast. She's the author of Breathe Again, How to Live Well When Life Falls Apart. And she's the host of the podcast, Chemo Chair Prayers. Her goal is to help you discover life doesn't have to be pain-free to be full, and then go live it. Welcome to the program, Niki.
Oh, it's so good to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'm delighted to have you on my podcast. I've been part of 2 of your Trusting God Through Cancer summits. So we're going to flip the switch just a little bit today, and I'm going to ask you the questions.
I love that.
You know, Niki, so often our passion comes out of our own hurts and trials. Where did your passion for helping others discover that life doesn't have to be pain-free to be full, and that they should go live it? How did that come to be?
Yes, it really came out of my own story. So, having lost both my mum and my sister to cancer, I was diagnosed just 6 weeks after losing my sister, Jo, and she was just 43.
Wow.
And so it felt like the family heat-seeking missile of death that locked on me was my turn. And, we're Brits, as you can tell, but and so I kind of had this, my stiff up and perfectly waxed upper lip and my keep calm and carry on attitude and my faith and my God, I'm going to survive. And then, you know what it's like, Michelle, I got to the point where surviving was all I was doing. And it just felt like I was living a life I hadn't signed up for. Someone had put me on the cancer train and I had not bought that ticket. And I felt like I was just running on fumes. And I realized that I had bought into this myth that the abundant life that God has for us, I have come that you might have life and life to the full. I had assumed that it was off in the future waiting for me at some point when all this was over. And I look at that verse in John 10:10, and I'm like, I don't think that's what he means. I think I had skewed it theologically. I think that skew had come from social media, from what we see in the world, that everybody's life is happy, skippy, healthy, wealthy. And, mine right now is not like that. So that life must be waiting off in the future when the cancer's done, when the kids are off at school, when my marriage is sorted out, whatever we're going through.
Right.
And so I really kind of did a lot of digging in how do we thrive and not just survive when life falls apart. And really that's become my purpose. God has said, this is what I want you to talk about. My Caring Bridge site that was really just to keep friends and family updated turned into, hilarious stories of what happened to me while I was going through treatment. Because you know this, but your people here who might not know me don't know that my cancer was rectal cancer. I mean, the most ridiculously funny things happen. So I would share those, and then I would share encouragement about God, what God was, telling me and showing me through this. And people said, don't stop. And that turned into writing Breathe Again. And now I host the Chemo Chair Prayers podcast and the Trusting God Through Cancer podcast, and really write for anyone who feels like life sideswiped them. So that's kind of how it all came about. I never set out. If you had have told me 10 years ago that this is what I'd be doing, I would have just not believed you.
And that's such a common theme that I hear among my guests, is that I think when we're young, we develop this perception that we get to choose our ministry. And most of the people that I talk to, myself included, would tell you, this was not the ministry I wanted. I didn't want to be going through or teaching people how to get through depression, anxiety, cancer.
Yeah.
But I am grateful though, Niki, because what that does show me is that God doesn't waste our pain. That might not be the ministry we would have signed up for, but if we are open, God will use our pain
He will.
for good.
Yeah, he so will. He doesn't waste anything. And when people tell us that when we're in the middle of pain, it's like, oh, God won't use it. It can sound like such a platitude. And so,
Yeah.
you're just like, I want to throttle you,
Yes.
because it just hurts right now. I'm not, mid cancer wasn't the time for me to, start thinking about that. Or it wasn't, if somebody had said it like that. But now I hear it, I'm like, yes, it's, hindsight and all
Yeah, I
that.
remember being in the throes and people would say that. And in all transparency, because I am so far from perfect, I remember thinking, I don't care if this helps anybody else. I don't want to go through this anymore. I
Yeah.
want it to be done.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's when we're on the other side and we've experienced some healing that's when the Lord says, okay, but let's use that now. Now that
Yes.
I've helped heal you, let's use you to help heal other
Yeah.
people. And then it feels more like a privilege and an honor, but not when you're in the middle of it. So if you're hearing this, don't say that to your friend who's going through cancer or divorce or whatever.
Yeah.
Don't say it then.
No, exactly. And I think there's also an element of when we realize, well, if this is the journey I'm on, then I would like something positive to come out. And found was the more I looked outside my own kind of bubble of pain, actually it relieved a lot of the pressure. Not the It relieved some of the pain. I found that when I even just offered an encouraging text to someone, it blessed me and helped me far more than I think it helped the other person. So by actually stepping into that purpose, I was renewed. I found purpose and intimacy and connection and life and abundance and all those things. So it wasn't that I set out to find those things, but they came.
There's a famous psychiatrist by the name of Carl Menninger, and he was speaking one time to thousands of people. And someone asked him, if someone's on the brink of wanting to end it all and commit suicide, what would you tell them? Well, being a psychiatrist, everybody in the room expected, he said, well, they would expect him to say, go to the nearest emergency room, get on medication. But he didn't, Niki. He said, I would tell them to walk out that back door, walk across the street, cross the railroad track, and find somebody to help.
Mm.
Because just like what you just referred to, when we are willing to look beyond ourselves and enter into someone else's hurt,
Mm-hmm.
it is a blessing for us, but it also takes the focus off all the negative that can weigh us down, that can pull us into self-pity and despair. So what you're saying is just kind of confirming what he said. But I'm really curious, in your journey, how did you come to realize that you had hunkered down and we're waiting for life to get better. What was that turning point where you realized, wait a minute, I'm just waiting and waiting, and that's not
Mm.
how I'm supposed to live?
I don't think there was any one particular aha moment. I just think that it was a slow realization. And I often say that, we want God to speak in a revelation, but often he speaks in a realization.
Mm,
And it's a slow dawning of, I've got this the wrong way round. And as I started to help people through this caring bridge, I think that was probably one of the key things through which God spoke. That it was like, as I saw that sharing, yes, my pain, and what I was going through, but then helping them by, making them laugh and encouraging them with, what God was showing me in the midst of this. There was this sense of, this is actually feeding me.
mm,
It's, I'm beginning to thrive, and I don't actually have to wait. And I dug into the scriptures, and what I ended up doing was speaking to lots of people who had been through all sorts of different things. And if people read my book, they'll meet Becky, who lost her husband when she was 8 months pregnant with their second child, having just lost her father. And they'll meet Todd, who lives with chronic pain, and Kristen, who's a triple amputee with 5 kids. And I mean, all these people, and they showed me these lessons about how to do that, how to grab hold of the life that we have, and the ways to do that. Because I don't know about you, Michelle, but I would read devotions and think, yes, I know I need to trust God, but it's hard. How do I do that right now? Give me some steps. Or, I know I need to be thankful, give thanks in all things, but I don't feel thankful. Show me how. And so really that's why I ended up writing Breathe Again, and it being super practical and down to earth, because it was like I needed these practical tools and steps and people who've been where I was, and examples from the Bible to bring it alive. And yeah, I just needed the the guidance. And so I wrote the book that I needed, and that's how it all came about.
that's what you and I have both done.
Yeah.
Written the book that we needed so that other people have them, but we wish that we had had them.
Exactly.
Niki, how do you think that our emotions and our responses to life events keep us from thriving in life?
Oh, that is such a great question, and an enormous question. And I am not a psychologist or psychiatrist or anything, but I do think our our mind talk, or our mind, chatter, soundtracks, to use John Acuff's words, or in the book I call it God trash and self trash, the stuff we believe about ourselves, which I think comes out of these emotions, really can determine how well we're doing. If you're listening, I'm using air quotes if you're not watching. But when we believe that about God, that he is, an old man in the sky that's judgmental, and he's just waiting to hit his mighty Satan, and then we're going to think that our pain is punishment, that he's mad at us, that he's not present, and he's forgotten about us, and he's busy, helping more spiritual people who don't shout at their kids on the way to church, and when we believe those kind of things, it spirals us away from God, it spirals us down. And we also have beliefs about ourselves like that. And especially you'll be familiar with the work, Michelle, of Martin Seligman, the psychologist who has done all this work about what holds us back in our trauma and that stops us from, becoming resilient and walking through it. And these beliefs of personalization, it's all my fault, or pervasiveness, that my whole life is ruined, or permanence, that it's always going to be this way. And actually, God speaks into every single one of those beliefs. And I think those things can really hold us back. And when we go back to the word and we go back to the truth about who we are and whose we are and who God is, that's when we start to really start to thrive, when we can shift our mental state. But we need to get that rubbish out of our head and replace it with good truth.
So good. Friends, we're going to take a real quick commercial break, but when we come back, Niki's going to share more about how to live the abundant life despite our circumstances. We'll be right back. Welcome back to your hope-filled perspective, where my guest today is my friend Niki Hardy, and we're talking about how to thrive, not simply survive when life gets difficult. Niki, what was one of your biggest lessons that you learned through the cancer journey with your mom, your sister, and even yourself?
Well, I think it was that this abundant life that God has come to give, that Jesus came to give us, isn't off waiting in the future. I think that was my epiphany, that it's possible to find that even in the midst of pain. And when we read books by Corrie ten Boom, who was imprisoned in Auschwitz during the war, or we read Johnny Erickson Tada, or people like this, it's easy to think, well, it's okay for them because they're super spiritual people, and I'm not a Corrie ten Boom, or I'm just little old Niki. But when we put in place and do a few things, and they're not like massive things that are so overwhelming, we can find that full abundant life. And I think the first thing is to rethink what it is we think the abundant life actually is and looks like. Like I said at the beginning, we think it's a life where we live in this beautiful house, and our marriages are perfect, and our kids are perfect, and our health is perfect, and our kids read in tree houses with dappled sunlight. And I'm like, no, my kids are like killing themselves on the floor, and there's dirty clothes everywhere. And we've got this shift that we need to make. But actually, an abundant life, as Jesus said, a life of overflowing. It's overflowing not with kind of money and health and status and power and those things. It's overflowing with intimacy with him and other people, and joy in the midst of anything and everything, good, bad, or ugly. It's comfort and strength and peace. And it's those more intangible things that your neighbors won't see, or they will when they chat with you and they're like, wow, there's something about you, but they can't put their finger on it. And I feel like that shifting that mindset is the thing that will be the first catalyst to finding that abundant life, to thriving and not just surviving. And then there are some super practical things you can do. And I go through 7 of them in the book. There's choosing brave, because brave isn't something you are, or you're born with, or whatever. It's a choice, big, small, trusting God. And I had to make a 5-step plan to trust God, because it doesn't come naturally when things are really hard. And being grateful, practicing gratitude, and finding community, and being vulnerable, and embracing the journey, and reaching out, and things like this. I found a really practical things you can do to say, okay, life sucks right now, but I am going to jolly well grab the most out of it, all that God came to give me. Jesus died on the cross so that we could have this abundant life, and I'm not living it. So how can I do that?
Let's get real practical to help my listeners who are probably many are connecting, saying that's what I want, but I can't even picture what that looks like. My bank account is empty.
Yeah.
My kids are not walking the way that I would desire for them to walk. In my journey, I have decided to intentionally look each day for what I call simple joys. It could be a new bud on a plant outside. It could be a joke that one of my kids sent me. I've got one son who sent me funny TikTok videos, and that'll just make me giggle. And that's what I call a simple joy, because I want to be aware
Yeah.
of the simple things that God has put around us in the midst of life crushing circumstances.
Yeah.
Will you share some of what you have found that you now consider abundance that maybe you wouldn't have before?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think for me, it goes back to the Philippians verse you read at the beginning, because that starts with, rejoice. I say it again, rejoice. And, when they're hard, we're like, gonna rejoice out, and then it's like, and give thanks in all things that are all tight, and you're like, oh, that's hard. And, even for the hard stuff, you want me to give thanks, not just for the good, but for the hard. But there's a bridge right in the middle that for years I completely missed. And it's 4 little words: the Lord is near. And we can rejoice and we can give thanks because the Lord is near. And I think for me, what the abundant life looks like is like you, looking for the simple joys, but it's more these little God winks that He is near. He is near. And for me, I feel his presence when I look at the sky, when a hug from one of my kids or from, a friend. Not that we're doing a huge amount of, I'm a hugger and I'm really struggling this year.
Yeah.
But the little things that it's almost like he nudges at me and goes, see, I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm here. And I know I get a lot of emails from people saying, I just don't feel God. And I think it's so hard when we are so trained to think we're going to be kind of overwhelmed with this sense of holy presence, and we're going to, just know that we know that we know. But God speaks through His creation. He speaks through community. He speaks with other people's hands and feet, and people might just sit and breathe Him in and just go, in the sense that my shoulders are no longer up near my ears, being worn like earrings, that is just a sense of God's presence and comfort. And, someone we both know, Dr. Sandra Dalton, she says she sits in a chair, like an armchair, and puts her head against the rest and just imagines that being against the Lord's chest. And I think we can all find a way to sense His nearness. Some of us might think in patterns and numbers and see God's, glory and presence in spreadsheets and, numbers and things. He speaks in so many different ways. And for me, just those God winks of, I'm here, I'm here. That's abundant life, just knowing that He's with me.
And I wonder if a different way to conceptualize this abundant life is to reflect on the fact that God is less concerned with our comfort than He is with respect to us growing in our understanding and appreciation of His character.
Mm.
So, in the midst of the suffering, when life is hard, when it's gotten us to fall down, what if part of that abundant life that Christ came to give was to show us during the times when we need Him most that He is faithful, that He
Mm.
is merciful, that He is gracious and kind
Yeah,
in the midst of the hard? To me, that's
exactly.
abundance, to be able to realize life does stink sometimes.
Yeah.
but God can be trusted because he can't not be those things.
Exactly. And I think when I originally heard people say things like, he's more interested in us learning about his character than about our comfort, I'm like, well, that's quite kind of self-centered of him. It's like him's like, I don't care that you're in pain. I want you to focus, to think about me and what I'm like. And actually, when, as you were unpacking that, it's like, no, he wants us to know that, because the level of our comfort becomes less and less important to us the more we know his faithfulness and his provision and his mercy and his grace and his just outrageous love for us. It's like the comfort will diminish in its voice and the way it shouts at us, and our pain will quieten the more we let the character of God speak.
Well, and while I don't think God causes all of our suffering, he allows it because, don't you think, Nikki, if we didn't suffer, we wouldn't need God. We wouldn't turn to God. We wouldn't learn just how faithful he is. Because I don't know about you, I don't want to speak for you, but in my own life, when things are going really well, I'm like, I got it, God.
Yeah,
I'll
I'm
connect
good.
with you the next time something bad happens. No, so I think because he is so gracious and sovereign, he does allow these difficulties to come in our life, because
Yeah.
otherwise we wouldn't connect with him and we wouldn't learn the depth of his love, which we can then share with others when they need it.
Exactly. And I think we'd lose connection with each other somehow. If nobody ever went through any pain, there'd never be any real vulnerability. There wouldn't be any depth of connection in that respect. So yes, I agree with that.
So let's talk about that for just a second, because you and I have both gone through some pretty difficult pain in life. And part of what I want to do is help my listeners appreciate how they can step into someone's pain. Because
Yeah.
both as a neuropsychologist, but also someone who's gone through a lot of things, I know that a lot of people will step back because they're afraid of saying or doing the wrong thing. When you journeyed through this with your mom and your sister, and then your own experience with cancer, what was most helpful to you? What would you want my listeners to know? Hey, if you know someone who's going through a hard time and they've fallen down in life, do this or say this.
Yeah. I would encourage people to lean in, not lean away, like you say, and give them permission. I want to, if you're listening today and you know someone who has just been diagnosed, or they've had a loss, or they're going through something prolonged and just really hard, I want to give you permission to mess up and to be open and honest and say, I have absolutely no idea what to say. All I could, but I want you to know I'm here for you. This sucks. I hate it for you. And I know you're in real pain, but I'm going to mess up and say the wrong thing, but I don't want that to stop me loving you. So I'm going to, if you're okay with that, I'm going to keep loving you imperfectly, because the alternative is to be too afraid and not love you not be with you at all. One of my great friends, when I told her that, yeah, it was cancer, she just said, "Oh, that sucks." And there was no like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, what can I do?" There was just like, she just went straight to the fact that it was horrible and I knew she hated it for me. And it was the perfect, response, really. And so I would encourage you to lean in imperfectly, as opposed to in fear, stepping away or just being hesitant. Because I know, even having been through everything, we pastor a church right now, not for too much longer, and we've had some tragic things happen. And even with the experience I've had of people in my life when I've gone through pain, doing wonderful things or, saying completely the wrong things or just vanishing. There are times when I've been like, oh, I don't know what to say. Oh, should I, and then it gets to the point, well, it's been 3 weeks now and I haven't reached out. Now it's just plain awkward. And so I would just encourage you to lean in and be open and honest and be willing to sit in the unknown, be willing to sit in the pain and the awkwardness.
I would 100% agree with that, because if you step away out of fear of doing or saying the wrong thing, it sends the message to the person suffering that you don't care.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
even worse than saying the wrong thing.
And the enemy comes to steal
Yes.
and destroy, and he's stealing the love, destroying the friendship,
Yes,
but
absolutely.
entering in, however imperfectly, that's where you both will find the abundant life in the pain.
You can even go so far as to say, I'm going to ask in advance that you will forgive me if I
Yeah.
say or do the wrong thing, but I care.
Yeah.
And I'm learning how to support you just as you're learning how to go through whatever it is that they're going through.
Yes. Yeah. That's a great, great thing to say.
Friends, we're going to take a real short commercial break, but this is your hope-filled perspective. So when we come back, I'm going to ask Niki to share her hope-filled perspective with you. We'll be right back. Welcome back to your hope-filled perspective. We are having a great conversation today about how to thrive and not just survive when you fall down in life. Niki, we've been talking about your journey, my journey, and those we know. And the thing that we talked about right before this last break was how the enemy swoops in to try to steal, kill, and destroy. And you and I both touched on it throughout this episode, is the lies that we often believe, whether we're the one going through the difficult time or we're the ones trying to support those. Will you just talk a little bit more about what some of those lies are that we often believe about ourselves or God when life sideswipes us, and what's the truth that we need to hear in its place?
Well, going back to that work of Martin Seligman, he identified these 3 core beliefs that are just so prevalent in people that have been through trauma. But these beliefs are what holds us back from moving through it and becoming resilient. And they are personalization. It's all my fault. And I thought my cancer was my fault. I was like, well, it's because of the genes. Or my family connection was told it was nothing to do with that. Then I was like, well, it must be because I eat the whole apple, even including down to the pips, and I'm probably like fermenting in my stomach or something. I mean, I wanted to figure out a way to blame myself, and then I was blaming myself for the financial burden and the burden on the kids. It's all my fault. And then there's permanence. It will always be like this. I couldn't imagine a life that was back to normal, whatever normal was going to be. And who knew whether my cancer would ever be done or over. And then pervasiveness. It felt like when my bum got cancer, my whole life got cancer. It was affecting my marriage and my kids and my friendships and everything. So these 3 views that we hold when we go through trauma. And what I came to realize is that God has dealt with each one of them.
Mm.
If it really is our fault, if we are suffering because of some actions that we have done that are causing suffering well, there is now no condemnation for those that are in Christ Jesus. He has come and he's dealt with that. And then if you're like me, it's false guilt. It's rubbish. And he's come to set us free from that as well, and to, unbind us and set us free. And then his abundant life is for our whole life. And so, with the permanence, there's that. And no, sorry, pervasiveness and permanence, we often say that it's not just pie in the sky when you die with God. There's cake on your plate while you wait. This, it's like he's come to give us abundant life right now. And so God has dealt with each of those human reactions to trauma. And so replacing those when we notice them, I think the hardest thing is often to notice them. I once went to a conference where they had a notice. It was literally a big board at the front that said notice. And it was really to highlight that we need to notice what is going on and what comes up. So it was a notice, which I thought was very clever. But when we notice that we're thinking, oh, it's my fault, then we're like, well, is it false guilt or is it, true guilt? And deal with it with God. Has my whole life really been affected? No, my kids are actually, they're doing okay, or it's not affecting, the joy I get when I go in the garden, or there are ways that we can find that. And then the stuff we believe about God and how that impacts us. There is a scripture for every single thing. He's not mean. God is nice and he likes you. I mean, I want to say that to everybody watching and listening. He's on your side. He is for you. But it's so easy to forget when we're in the middle of pain. And when we notice these thoughts, then we can bring it to him and we can offer help. I remember I wrote about this story in the book, but we were on holiday at this lovely resort, but there were all these blackbirds that would come, and if you had a snack and it was by your lounger, they were like swooping in, and it was really annoying. But then one day this woman came out with a big hawk on her gloved hand. And I was like, come on, kids, look, there's a bird display. Isn't this cool? And she would send the hawk off. And as it flew around, all these blackbirds would scatter. And then I realized, as this woman came out day after day, this was no kind of clientele entertainment. This was them sending this bird out to work. And I was like, that's what it feels like. We have these blackbirds that come and kind of these lies and belief that kind of come and steal what we are believing, or swooping in and taking things. And we need this hawk of truth to kind of be circling and sending them scattering. And so when we are in the word, whether it's in the morning, these things will come back to us when we need them during the day, because they've been circling in our mind and they've been working. And that was just a really great visual of how we need this truth when we've got all this mind chatter. And unfortunately, it's not one and done. It's not like,
No.
oh, good, there's no condemnation for those that are in Christ Jesus. I'm set free. I'm never going to think that again. Nope. Give me 5 minutes and I'll be thinking about it again.
But that is why scripture tells us to take every thought captive, because it's not a one and done.
No.
It's a moment by moment, day by day.
Yeah.
And the more we do it, the more we do notice when we're believing a lie.
Exactly.
And it becomes easier. Niki, if a listener is really in a hard place, maybe they've fallen down in life, or maybe they've just been given a devastating diagnosis, what hope-filled perspective would you want to offer them today?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'd like to do what we were just talking about, which is to say, I'm so sorry. I see you, I hear you, I acknowledge how hard it is. I don't want to dismiss it or for you to think that, I'm brushing over it. But at the same time, I do want to encourage you by saying, don't wait. Don't wait for life to get better, to live life, to to press into God, even that if that pressing into God looks like, God, I'm so mad. What is going on? How long is this going to last? I mean, be a true psalmist. But I would say don't wait for life to get better. God has so much for you right now. And when we're open to it, that's when we really start to learn what true abundance is. And it's great. Doesn't look like what we thought, but it's
That's for
good.
sure. And we can do it in those little ways, like you and I were
Yeah.
talking about, looking for the God winks or the simple joys or whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
the bountiful blessings, whatever your
Yeah.
label is. But it starts in the small.
Yeah.
And the more we do that, don't you think, Nikki, it becomes easier to do. And then the more we really do realize
Yeah.
we are living in abundance, even in the midst of the hard.
Yeah. I think it's almost like our focus changes, or we start to see things that were there all along. I call them like rubies in the rubble. It's like our focus is on the rubble. And then we're like, oh, hold on a minute. When I shift my perspective, or I don't know, put on God colored glasses, they start to shine. They were there all along,
Yeah.
but they now, you know, can be seen.
That reminds me of a scripture verse from Psalm 62, verses 1 through 2. And that says, truly, my soul finds rest in God. My salvation comes from him. And truly, he is my rock and my salvation. He is my fortress. I will never be shaken.
That's my verse.
So, friends, I don't know what you're going through. I don't know if you're going through a devastating health diagnosis.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're going through marriage difficulties, if you have a prodigal child, if you're facing unemployment or some other financial stress. I don't know what your particular suffering is, but I know the one who is capable of walking with you through it and who wants to be your rock throughout it. So I pray that you will press in, just like Nikki said today, that you will lean in and not lean away. Lean into God, lean into a church family, lean into your supportive friends. Resist the temptation to pull away. But instead, as Nikki has so eloquently shared today, start living despite the hard. Don't wait for the hard to be over before you really start enjoying
Yeah.
what God has given us. Friends, this has been another episode of Your Hope Filled Perspective. I've been your host, Dr. Michelle Bengtson. If something in today's episode has encouraged you, or motivated you, or inspired you, or maybe you know someone who's fallen down in life and they need a hope filled perspective, would you consider sharing this episode with them? And it would mean so much to us if you would go and rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast so that you don't miss a single week of a biblically based hope filled perspective. Until next week, may you have a hope filled week.